When we start talking about dismissive avoidance, there's a lot of misunderstanding that clouds the conversation. People will often throw around labels like cold, selfish, or even heartless. But the truth is, none of those labels actually capture what's happening beneath the surface. A dismissive avoidant is not someone who lacks emotion, and they're not someone incapable of love. What they are is someone who has been conditioned, psychologically, emotionally, sometimes even philosophically, to survive by depending on themselves and themselves alone. Think about it like this: for many of us, closeness feels safe. Intimacy is comforting. When someone leans in, we instinctively want to lean back in. But for a dismissive avoidant, intimacy is complicated. It represents a space where vulnerability could be exposed, and vulnerability in their worldview is unsafe. It's like they're carrying around this invisible shield, one that tells them, if you get too close to someone, you risk being controlled, disappointed, or abandoned. And this shield isn't something they put on lightly. It's something that's been forged over years, sometimes decades, of experiences that taught them independence is the only way to be secure. So when we talk about the stages of no contact, we have to start here. We have to start with that shield. Because the first instinct of a dismissive avoidant, when distance appears, is not panic. It's not despair. It's relief. They think, good, I can breathe again. They experience space as safety. And in their mind, this confirms what they've always believed. See, I do better alone. But here's the part most people miss. That relief is not proof they don't care about you. It's not evidence that the bond meant nothing. It's simply the way their nervous system has been trained to respond to closeness. Imagine a runner who's been sprinting with a weight strapped to their chest. When the weight comes off, the first feeling is freedom, right? But does that mean the runner hated running with it? Not necessarily. It just means they notice the absence of pressure. Now, let's go a little deeper. The dismissive avoidance need for independence often gets confused with strength, but in reality, it's a very fragile kind of strength. It's built on avoidance, on turning away from needs they actually still have but can't admit. Because admitting those needs would mean admitting they are human, just like the rest of us, and that terrifies them. So when no contact begins, they lean on that old identity. I don't need anyone. I've got myself. This is easier. If you're on the outside looking in, this can be incredibly painful to witness. You might think, if they loved me, they'd fight for me. If they cared, they'd reach out. But what's really happening is that the avoidant is doing what they've always done, protecting themselves by withdrawing into a self-contained world where they don't risk rejection. And here's where the philosophy comes in. We often assume love is about pursuit, about closeness, about proving our devotion through constant presence. But love has another dimension. It's also about absence. It's about what happens in the quiet moments when someone isn't there. And for a dismissive avoidant, that quiet space is not empty. It's a testing ground. It's where the initial relief eventually gives way to curiosity, then longing, and sometimes, yes, recognition that they actually do want connection. But they can only arrive there if the space exists in the first place. This is why the first stage of no contact is so critical to understand. It's easy to misinterpret their relief as rejection, when in fact it's just the first step in their process. If you collapse under that first stage, if you chase, if you try to force closeness again, you don't give them the chance to move past the shield. You simply reinforce the belief that intimacy is suffocating. So let's shift the perspective. Instead of seeing that initial relief as a personal rejection, See it as evidence of how deeply wired their defenses are. See it as the beginning of a journey, not the end. Because if you can hold steady through that stage, if you can allow them the space they think they want, you create the conditions for something remarkable, the possibility that they might, for the first time, come back not because they have to, but because they choose to. And isn't that what we want in love? Not someone who's there out of obligation, but someone who, despite every instinct to run, decides to stay. That's the paradox of the dismissive avoidant. They'll tell themselves they don't need anyone. They'll breathe a sigh of relief when you step back. But if the connection is real, if love is present, that space doesn't erase you. It brings them closer to realizing just how much you mattered. So remember this, the shield they carry is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. After that initial relief comes something fascinating. And honestly, this is the stage that most people underestimate. We often assume that once an avoidant feels relief, that's it. The story is over. They've decided they're better off alone. They've moved on. And the connection is dead. But that's not how human psychology works. Relief is temporary, it fades. And when it does, something much more interesting begins to take its place. This is the second stage, curiosity. It's the emotional rebound where, in the quiet of their solitude, the dismissive avoidant begins to circle back mentally toward you. Now, let's be clear. They won't announce this. They won't send you a message saying, "I miss you," or "I've been thinking about you." That level of directness terrifies them. Instead, it shows up in smaller, subtler ways. They might scroll through your social media late at night, lingering a little too long on your posts. They might casually ask a mutual friend how you're doing, trying to disguise their interest as indifference. Or they might just sit with their own thoughts and find themselves replaying a memory, something you said, something you did, that they can't quite let go of. What's happening here is that the nervous system, which initially felt relief from distance, begins to recognize the cost of that distance. Independence, after all, feels powerful only until loneliness creeps in. And loneliness is inevitable, because no matter how avoidant someone is, they're still human. They still crave connection. They still long for recognition, for intimacy, for the sense of being seen by another. They just don't know how to ask for it. This is where philosophy meets psychology in a really profound way. John Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people." And while avoidance might resonate with that on the surface, other people feel suffocating, controlling, demanding. The deeper truth is actually the opposite. Hell isn't other people. Hell is separation. It's the isolation of knowing that you want connection, but not feeling safe enough to reach for it. That is the quiet prison a dismissive avoidant lives in every single day. So in this stage, what you'll see is not outright pursuit, but micro movements toward connection. They're testing the waters. They're checking to see if you're still available without actually risking rejection. Because for them, rejection feels like annihilation. Remember, their whole identity has been built on not needing anyone. To admit they care is to risk exposure, and exposure is terrifying. So instead, they watch from a distance. They gather data. They search for signs that maybe, just maybe, you haven't closed the door completely. Now, here's the critical thing to understand: this curiosity is not a game. It's not manipulation. It's survival. It's the only way they know how to bridge the gap between their fear of closeness and their hunger for connection. And if you misread this stage, if you think their silence means they're gone forever, you'll miss the fact that they are, in their own way, already coming back. What you need to grasp is that their pull toward curiosity is a sign of love, even if it doesn't look like the kind of love you're used to. For most of us, love shows up in presence, in gestures, in pursuit. For them, love shows up in hesitation, in watching from the sidelines, in replaying your voice in their head when no one else is around. It's quieter, but it's no less real. And this is where patience becomes the ultimate power. If you break no contact at this stage, if you rush in to fill the silence, you interrupt their process. You short-circuit the curiosity that is slowly, painfully leading them back to you. But if you hold steady, if you stay grounded in your own life while they navigate theirs, you give them the chance to realize something they would never admit out loud: they miss you. And missing you for them is a radical admission. Let me frame it this way. When an avoidant starts circling back mentally, it's the first crack in the shield. It's proof that the love they tried so hard to bury is still alive. It's proof that independence, while comforting, is not enough to satisfy the deeper human longing inside them. That longing is your leverage, not through force, not through chasing, but through presence and patience. So as you move through this stage, remember this: their curiosity is not weakness. It's progress. It's the first sign that beneath all the defenses, there's still a heart that beats for you. And isn't that worth waiting for? By the time the avoidant moves past that first rush of relief and through the stage of quiet curiosity, something deeper begins to shift. This is the third stage, and it's the one that often surprises people the most. It's where the dismissive avoidant, who has spent their entire life insisting they don't need anyone, suddenly begins to reevaluate. And not in an abstract way, in a concrete, emotional, heart-level way. This is the stage where the avoidant begins to feel the weight of the absence. At first, distance felt liberating. Then, curiosity made them wonder what you were up to, whether you had moved on, whether you still thought of them. But now, the silence becomes something more. It becomes a mirror. And when they look into that mirror, they don't just see you. They see themselves. They see the pattern they've been repeating for years, pushing people away, convincing themselves they're fine, only to end up alone with the echo of their own defenses. This evaluation isn't comfortable for them. In fact, it's deeply unsettling. Because to acknowledge the importance of what they lost means confronting a truth they've avoided for years, that love is not a threat, that closeness is not suffocation, and that their heart, as guarded as it is, still longs for connection. It forces them to wrestle with the paradox that has defined their life, wanting love, yet fearing it at the same time. And here's what's fascinating. During this stage, their behavior often looks contradictory. On one hand, you might see them reaching out in small, almost hesitant ways. A text that doesn't say much but says enough. A comment on something you've shared. A sudden, "Hey, I was just thinking about you." These gestures might seem insignificant, but for an avoidant, they are monumental. Each one is a risk. Each one is a step toward vulnerability. On the other hand, you'll also notice moments where they pull back again, almost as if they're spooked by their own feelings. This push and pull is not about manipulation. It's about testing their own capacity to stay open. Imagine standing at the edge of a pool, wanting to dive in, but terrified of the cold. You dip a toe in, then retreat. You come back, lean closer, hesitate again. That's what this stage feels like for them. Now, this is where the philosophical depth comes in. Love at its core is a choice. It's not just an emotion that sweeps over us. It's a decision, moment by moment, to show up, to stay, to engage. For the avoidant, reaching this stage is about moving from instinct to choice. Their instinct has always been to run. But when they start re-evaluating, they have to decide, will I keep repeating this cycle, or will I finally risk staying? That choice is terrifying, but it's also transformative. And here's the piece you have to hold onto when they do begin to re-engage, when they start inching toward connection instead of away from it. It's not because they suddenly woke up fearless. It's because love has managed to pierce through their fear. That's not avoidance anymore. That's love in its rawest, most unpolished form. It may not look like the sweeping romantic gestures we see in movies, but it's real. It's honest. And in many ways, it's more meaningful because it's so hard won. But this is also the moment where your response matters. If you rush in, if you demand too much too quickly, they may retreat again. If you play cold or punitive, you risk reinforcing the very fears they're trying to overcome. The key here is balance. Meeting them with openness without abandoning your own self-respect. It's about allowing them the dignity of their process while holding on to the dignity of your own boundaries. Because ultimately, this stage isn't just about them. It's about you too. It's about recognizing that love with an avoidant will never be about constant reassurance or instant closeness. It's about patience, understanding, and the willingness to see progress not in giant leaps, but in small, steady steps. If you can honor that, you give the relationship a chance to move into a space where it's no longer about running or chasing, but about choosing. And that's the real turning point. When a dismissive avoidant begins to re-evaluate and chooses to lean in, even just a little, it's not just a sign they care. It's a sign they're in love. Because only love has the power to make someone override their deepest fears. But only love can make someone step into the very vulnerability they've spent their life avoiding. So when you notice those small shifts, the tentative messages, the softening tone, the moments of unexpected vulnerability, don't dismiss them as insignificant. Recognize them for what they are, love breaking through the cracks of fear. And remember this, the real measure of love is not how loudly someone proclaims it, but how bravely they live it. By the time the avoidant reaches this stage, something important has already shifted. They've moved past relief. They've moved past curiosity. They've begun to re-evaluate what the relationship meant and what losing it feels like. But here's where it gets really powerful, because this stage is where the dismissive avoidant begins to turn that inward reflection into outward behavior. It's where you start to see the first real signs of movement back toward connection. Now, let's be honest. This doesn't happen in some grand, cinematic way. They're not going to show up at your doorstep with flowers and a speech that says, "I've realized I love you, and I'm never letting you go." That's not how a dismissive avoidant operates. They don't do grand gestures. What they do is subtle shifts. They test the waters. They reach out lightly, sometimes so lightly that you might miss it if you're not paying attention. But make no mistake, those small signs are huge. You might notice they suddenly send a text. Something casual, something almost meaningless on the surface, like, "Hey, how are you?" But for them, that's not casual. That's courage. That's them taking the risk of opening a door they usually keep bolted shut. Or maybe they don't message directly, but they interact with you online in ways they haven't for a long time. Liking a photo, commenting on something you posted, watching your stories more frequently. To the outside world, it looks trivial. But in the psychology of an avoidant, those are signals. Those are quiet bids for connection. And here's the thing, when an avoidant does this, it's not because they're bored. It's not because they're killing time. It's because they're no longer avoiding you. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. They're thinking about you more than they'd like to admit. They're allowing themselves, little by little, to lean back into the vulnerability they've resisted for so long. And that shift is profound, because for someone who has built their identity around self-protection, these small movements toward you are not just behavior. They are proof of love. Now, let's get into the deeper psychology here. What's really happening is that they're testing their reality. They're asking, often unconsciously, if I reach out, will I still be safe? If I show even a sliver of vulnerability, will I be punished for it? Or will I be met with openness? This is where many people go wrong. They misinterpret these subtle approaches as